was surprised by the sign outside, and I saw the website a number of times, and it says you are invited to take part in a unique conference focused on the church's most visible asset, real estate. As the Economo General, I would also say the church's most hidden liability, real estate. So on that note, I think that's where I'm going with my presentation this morning, more of a conversational, experiential approach, but a little bit about myself. My greatest talent that didn't bring me to Rome is that I'm an accordion player, but I don't think that's why I'm here. Though I did pick up the accordion off of one of the young gypsy boys one time by the Vatican, and I actually gave him €10 to play his accordion. So he invited me back anytime I want. It was interesting, but so I am the Economo General of the Friars Minor, and when I took this position, I was invited to take this position 7 years ago already. My brother had a conversation with me. He's a year younger than I. He's a CFO of a trucking parts company on the East Coast of the United States. And he said, "Boy, you've got the easiest job in the world." And I thought, okay, let me see. They're inviting me to Rome, an American, to take care of the Italian money. The Franciscans are an Italian order that they simply say we're Italian and we tolerate the rest of you. But it's true, more than 50% of our 12,000 friars are Italian, either in Italy or somewhere in one of the missions. So we still are an Italian order. To have an American to monitor the funds, the assets of the order raises a question, why would they invite someone like me? And might be because I know a little bit about it, but it's also because the order was in crisis. We had lost our entire endowment in a Ponzi type scheme in 2014. And the root of that crisis, which I never called a crisis, I always called it a financial situation. The root of it was a piece of property. And I'll talk to you how that fit into the whole schema of things. But my background is I'm actually an actuary by trade. And I do have an MBA. I joined the order because I didn't want to sit in an office and I wanted to teach high school students. I got to do that for about 3 years. And I found I live in a world of philosophers and theologians, most of whom know very little about assets, accounting, finances, business plans, because we're religious. And so I've been pretty well pegged to do certain kinds of work in solving problems. And one of them was here in Rome. And that's what brought me here. But my brothers, you have an easy job. I said, well, how could you say that? He said, look, you're a friar minor. You take the vow of poverty. You have nothing. And you're the CFO. What will you do all day? There's nothing to take care of. I wish that were true. We all know if we have any connection with the church or even with religious communities, we know that that is not true. I'd like to have my presentation here focus first. I'd like to give a context of why religious today seem to be looking at property, the asset of property or the liability of property, and then go into a little bit of a charism, the Franciscan charism. What is it as a mendicant? Why does this fit into our conversation today? And within that, to use a little bit of examples of my experiences within the order in terms of this. And then at the end, come out to tell you 2 things that I have learned, not only in my work, but in preparing my reflection for today. So the context, what is happening in the world that is causing the religious to consider the question of poverty, of property, of assets, of finances, of economy? It's always been a part of our lives in one form or another. But I think especially in the United States and the first world countries, it's becoming more of an issue. And there are 3 factors, I believe, affecting this. One is the aging of religious. And what's happened is religious life got quite populated. My province, one of the 7 in the United States of OFMs, had 500 friars at one time. That was in the 70s. When I joined in 1980, we had 303. Today we have 70, median age of 76. There are 4 friars younger than I in my province. For me, that's a tremendous vocational crisis. And it's a very practical thing. Our cemetery in Pulaski, Wisconsin, where we are founded, sits on a hill. It takes 6 strong friars to carry you up the hill. As an ex-provincial minister, I have a spot on the top of the hill. With only 4 friars younger than me, there's a chance there won't be anybody to carry me up the hill. I'll be buried at the bottom of the hill. And if you know, friends, if you know anything about Wisconsin farmland, the bottom of the hill is swampy and wet. That is my vocational crisis. So what has happened? We were large and now we're smaller and older. And as we were growing, especially through the 40s and the 50s and even in the early 60s, we built. That was the United States model. Here in Europe, the same thing was happening. The order was growing. They were acquiring properties. They were building. And now what do we do with these properties when the numbers have dropped so significantly? So that's one of the issues. The other issue that comes out is particularly with the use of property, and I'll speak again from the US experience. At the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, the church in the United States was very much an immigrant church. And many orders came from Europe to take care of certain needs for the Catholic and the non-Catholic population, especially in big cities. And what did religious do, and particularly religious sisters? They opened up schools and they opened up hospitals. And most of that was given to them by bishops. So the bishop said, sisters, come to my diocese. I'll give you a school. You could staff the school and educate young Catholics. And the sisters came, and this was what was happening. But then since Vatican II, and I believe a little before Vatican II, there's been a great change in the focus of ministry and also the focus of delivery of education and healthcare in the United States in particular. And so what has happened? The sisters and the male religious have moved out of education and hospital ministry. Male religious communities, especially those that are clerical by nature, have kind of a place to go. We go to parishes, and the bishops are happy to give us parishes. And that is our own struggle then, because the property is not ours. That's nice. It belongs to the bishop, but there's a ministerial struggle with fraternity and parish life and things. But as the sisters diminished in numbers and those who are left moved into other ministries, they began to give up their schools and their hospitals. And what's happening? The bishop is saying, well, I gave you that property to use. And the sisters are saying, I'm selling the hospital to a hospital system. And now we're going to get a lot of cash and this will support the sisters. And the bishop says, wait a second. That property still, in a way, belongs to us, the diocese. And that has become a conflict for many religious in the United States about property. What does it mean to own, to use, to possess, to legally covet in terms of the property that belongs? For male religious communities in the United States, especially again, another contextual experience that has brought the whole discussion of property is the sex abuse crisis and the need to come up with liquid cash to pay settlements and to pay lawyers. And so that has forced them in a way to look at their property, which many of us have had too much of already anyway for the last 30 years. But it gave us a reason beyond the arguments of, this is our mother house. We've been here forever. We can't give this up. What will happen to this property? These are the questions that come up about property. Now it's a matter of financial necessity. And so that becomes part of the contextual basis in which religious are looking at property from a very temporal perspective. And we have not always addressed it from another perspective, which I will get to as a learning tool. As friars, where does this come from? Well, we all know St. Francis was a poor brother. Understand first that Francis had no intention of starting an order. As a matter of fact, he spent most of his time by himself or with only Leo and maybe another friar. He spent most of his time traveling around, but he was charismatic. His message was of interest to young people in a changing world, changing from a feudal system where power was about property passed down through a system. And now we're coming into a mercantile world where Francis's father was a merchant. And so it's no longer about the land, it's about the cash, the coins, the trading. And it's in that world that Francis is coming out and saying, there's something wrong. We're allowing, whether it was property or whether we're allowing these coins, change, trade, to possess us. And that was Francis's escape. He was trying to get out of that context and enter into a context where he felt free and could find joy. This was his mission. And as he went around and preached, he preached a gospel of freedom and a gospel of joy, a gospel where you are possessed by God and not by the things of this earth, which was either property or money at this time. And it's in this world that Francis begins to attract followers. By the time he died, Francis had 5,000 followers. That's remarkable. In less than 20 years of actual public ministry, he had 5,000 followers. But now what do we need? The itinerant model is problematic because now you have people that have to be housed. But we don't want to own anything. So, well, he rebuilds a church and puts a couple people here and rebuilds another church. And there's a place called Rivoltorto just outside of Assisi. There's a barn there, and there was at the time of Francis. So he took a few of his brothers and they moved into that barn. You know, possession is 9/10 of the law, correct? So they moved in Rivoltorto and they were living there very comfortably. We know that because there are still markings where the friars slept in the barn. They had their own spot to sleep. But then the farmer came home with his cattle, his animals, and more or less said, you know, boys, you can't stay here anymore. Plus, you're getting too large to fit here. So Francis goes to who he thought was a friend, the church, and asks the bishop, is there an empty building that we can use? He didn't want the bishop to give him anything. He wanted to use it for his growing community. And the bishop says, well, we have nothing that we can offer you. Why don't you go talk to the Benedictines? They have a lot of property. See if they have something. So Francis goes over and talks to the Benedictines, and they said, by the way, we do have a piece of property you're very familiar with, as a matter of fact, because 2 years ago you rebuilt it. Remember that little church in the swamp, Puodziunas? If you go there now, the little church is still there. It's no longer a swamp, but there's a big basilica over top of it, built for the pilgrims to come. He says, we'll give you that. Francis says, I don't want to give it. I don't want to own it. So they make a deal that to this day is symbolically held. It's the longest contract of use that I'm aware of. For a basket of fish, the friars get to stay at the Puodziunas. Now, I'm wondering if that includes the basilica and how much land that includes, because, as the business guy, you want to know what is the contract. But all we know is there's a symbolic exchange of fish between us and the Benedictines for this use of property. And then he builds little huts around the church, Puodziunas, and that's ultimately where Francis dies. But it becomes for him home. And that's very significant. Not only for Francis, but for all of us and for religious. The need to find a place, a piece of property that we feel is home. So the Puodziunas becomes this. Francis calls what we call a chapter of mats. He invites all the friars, all the followers of Francis, to come for a meeting, a gathering, the Feast of Pentecost, to celebrate who they are. And of course, there's not enough space, so they're told to bring a mat. Thus, the chapter of mats happens, and the friars come and they gather for the first chapter. But it is here, this place, this physical place, that they do not own, they simply use. So they don't possess, they use. It is here that they come to celebrate, chapter of mats. It is here that they come to come home from the missions where they are welcomed. And it is from this place that they are sent out to the missions. So this place, this location, becomes the home of the Franciscan order, and still in many ways is considered that today because of this need to have a home. As religious, I know in my own province, and I see in provinces around the world, the whole sense of a mother house, a founding house, is so important that we need a place that we call home. In the United States, 6 of the 7 OFM provinces are in the process of becoming one new province. And it's supposed to happen in October of 23. We've been working on it. Well, I've been talking about it as an actuary for 25 plus years. They've been talking about it for about 10 years and actively engaged in the process since last summer when the Minister General said, boys, you need to set a date. And they set the date October 23rd. One of the conversations is, where is our home going to be? Now, amongst these 6 provinces, we have property all over the United States. An early decision was, we will not use one of the properties that we have so that we could have a neutral site. As a finance guy, I'm like, you're crazy. You have all of these properties, use one of them. But again, there's this emotion that gets involved in creating a sense of home for the new identity. Now, I think there's a few perfect places for a lot of reasons, but that conversation is very difficult to start because of the emotional connection that we have with the properties. And now we want a new emotional start. And that doesn't always fit with the business model. And this is what we as friars have found out over time. So the sense of home. The order continues to grow after Francis, and even with St. Bonaventure, who is considered oftentimes as the second founder of the order, because it's really after Francis's death that the friars began to realize we have something going here, and this is going to last a long time. You know, when Francis was dying, he was lying naked on the ground. Francis had this thing about not only possessions, but about nakedness. You know, when he had a fight with his father in front of the bishop in the town's in the bishop's square in Assisi, he takes off all of his clothes and gives it back to his father. You can imagine this is, 12th century. The people are saying, oh my God, what's happening here? But this is what's going on. Then when he dies, he asks to be laid naked on the ground as he came into the world, so he shall leave the world. And the friars asked, Francis, tell us how to live. Tell us what we should do. Tell us where we should go. And Francis said, brothers, I have done what is mine to do. May the Lord teach you what is yours. And that created a very a la carte order. We are not the Benedictines. We are not the Jesuits. We are not the Marianists or the Marists. We are friars a la carte. We do a lot of different things. But with that comes a challenge of property. I mean, if you're the Benedictines, you know what you're going to build. If you're the Jesuits, you're going to build a university. If you're the Marianists or the Marists, you're going to build a school or a hospital. What are the friars going to do? We have these little places all over, and we just kind of convert them. This is our 800-year-old history. This is how our charism has affected our property. So Bonaventure realizes that something's happening here. One of the things he said is his concern was that we were getting too much property to use. Because again, this is still the 13th century, and Bonaventure says, the more property we have, the more weapons we need to protect it. And that becomes something that begins to affect the order in many ways. It also affects us, when you consider what we do to protect the assets that we have. And Bonaventure realized this in the 13th century. And the whole question for Bonaventure then was, are we going to be possessed by the property, or we allow ourselves to be possessed by God? And that's a question that Bonaventure struggles with throughout his whole leadership. The thing, what we do realize is that the whole idea of property use, possession, ownership is a very theologically fleeting idea. Because in effect, do you really own anything forever? Aren't we really ultimately users of the blessings that we have? I think this is a conversation that we friars struggle to have, but it's one that we must have and one that we must share with the church and the world. And it comes from the old Aristotelian ideas of common good that became a true Franciscan teaching under Duns Scotus, Alexander of Hales. This is all 3rd century. Bonaventure talked about common good. It's not new. Pope Francis thinks he has a new idea. He's digging up old ideas that have been around for over 2,000 years, but very Franciscan. The sense of what does it mean to be common good and how does that affect how we look at property? And in that context, the whole concept of ownership and possession is fleeting. And that's where we have to develop our idea of what does it mean to be stewards? What does it mean to care for what we have as blessing? As one who has worked with friars, properties, and finances for almost 40 years now, we friars are not good at caring for property. I can't tell you how many times I've gone in there and there is, deferred maintenance is forget it. That's stewardship. That's where it comes in. And so we need to understand that we don't possess forever. We can't own forever. We are simply users of property for a period of time. For what? That's a question yet to be asked and answered. And the sense that this is all temporary and that things are passing. And in that, change about property is a good thing. We should encourage it. Very difficult because it's our mother house. This is where we began. The friars have been here for 800 years, some places in Europe. It's my heritage is from Lithuania, so I'm connected with a small group of friars that are in Lithuania that have properties that they lost during the Soviet occupation. They got back and they're trying to rebuild. And they're a small community, and yet they have tons of properties. The 7 provinces of northern Italy, friars, we are organized in provinces around the world, usually quite regional. So 7 provinces in northern Italy recently combined. 50% of the properties they have are either now up for sale or repurposing. I think they have 2 or 3 people in their office just doing properties. It's hundreds of properties. And that's a challenge because we live with this emotional connection. Oh, we've been here forever. This is ours. And we've crossed the line of possession from use to possession, from a basket of fish to now we own this. There's something there that we need to grapple with and get back. The whole sense of stewardship is about the logic of gift, to accept what we have as gift. If we're not willing to give it away or to let it go, then we haven't accepted it that it was a gift. We've accepted it as something we deserve. And it's when I was teaching high school, I always, when students would say to me, Father, I deserve this, I used to throw them out of the classroom. I says, you deserve nothing. Everything is gift. That's the logic of gift. Connected also with this is the matter of justice. From each according to their ability, to each according to their need. How do we fit in the whole question of property and assets into that concept of justice? Especially as we have diminished in number in in all of the first world. And we grow now in places that don't have assets. So it creates a whole sense of sharing. Is there something to be sold in order that we could purchase something somewhere else? That's actually, believe it or not, a very difficult conversation to have. All rooted in the fact that it's hard to let go. It's hard for us to change those ideas. Some examples of property issues that we've dealt with. My province is rooted in Wisconsin, founded by a Polish brother. We're one of the only provinces in the world, of which there are 102 today entities around the world. We're the only province that I know of that was founded by a brother, not by a priest. And the brother was promised, he was from Poland, early 1880s, 1882, was promised beautiful land in Wisconsin, a settlement of Polish Catholics, needing Polish religious to come. And the letter goes on and on and on. And so with that letter, he attracted 3 priests to join him. The story goes, they arrived, they knelt in the swamp of Pulaski, Wisconsin, and cried. This was the gift that they were given. So we're founded basically as a rural province. Most of the men in my province since 1880s, we seem to be afraid of big cities. Where there's an Irish settlement that settled in New York, an Italian group that settled in New York, Germans that settled in St. Louis and Chicago, Austrians that settled in Cincinnati. We settled in Pulaski, Wisconsin. Does anybody know where Pulaski, Wisconsin is? Okay, thank you. It's about 17 miles northwest of Green Bay, Wisconsin. Now, Green Bay, Wisconsin, everybody knows about Green Bay. Green Bay Packers, if you're from the United States, that's the only reason you know about Green Bay, because it's 100,000 people in the town of Green Bay. When I drove into Pulaski, Wisconsin in 1990 to take over the Economo Treasurer's office, that was our headquarters at the time, there was a sign outside that said, welcome to Pulaski, 1,782 people. And then when you drive in, you cross it out and you put 1,783. And as you leave, you cross it out and you change it again. That's how small, that's my province. We're rural. We had farms. We attracted farm boys. We attracted more brothers than priests because of the type of property that we were settling on. We were on farms. And it built a certain character and a certain robustness in the province, which we struggle with now because we've moved into cities in the last 25, 30 years. And that's a real struggle for our province. So we had all these properties all over, always outside of the city. So not in Milwaukee, in Burlington, Wisconsin, 20 miles outside. Not in Boston, but in Canton, Massachusetts. Not in Philadelphia, but outside in, I forget what the suburb was that we were small. But it's always outside. Not in Chicago, but in West Chicago, 40 miles west. We built a seminary there. It was beautiful. And then the numbers dropped. We closed it. And that was in 1979. And we finally sold the property last year. It was at one time 120 acres. We sold off a little here, a little there, made some bad deals. Friars are good at that. If you ever want to make money, call me. I'll connect you with a friar group. You'll be sure to be rich. They'll be poor, but you'll be rich. But things like that happen because either we trust too much sometimes, or we're not equipped enough to understand what's involved in property repurposing and using and leasing, or we're theologians and philosophers. It doesn't cross our mind. And I think that's what it is the most. So that's West Chicago. Another place we have, our founding house was Pulaski, Wisconsin, and I did tear down the mother house. Therefore, I will never be a saint, nor will I ever be a bishop, nor the province will ever. That's why I think I'm in Rome. They threw me out because I tore down the mother house. But we built a nice retirement home. We built 2, as a matter of fact, Pulaski, Wisconsin, and Burlington. Burlington, we had a big seminary there at one time. We built a retirement home. We also built a senior housing, 48 unit senior housing on our property for lay people. We formed a corporation and we built and up until 2 years ago, we had it. We just sold it to the people who helped us build it in the first place. And it got to the point where the asset was paid off. We're no longer that much in the area. It's time to move on. But that's courageous decisions that we had to make. When we planned both Burlington and Pulaski, we built 25 unit friaries that could be converted into senior apartments. So the big invention, this was in 1992, was rooms with private baths, en suite. If you've been involved in any conversion of old friaries, monasteries, convents, buildings of the church, and you want to turn them into apartments, the biggest problem is plumbing. Because the older friaries all had these gang showers and bathrooms down the end of the hall. It was always a 45-minute walk, that he had to go because they were so big. And then you had to find it at night. So for religious to move into that mentality that this is something we need, it took us to get older to realize, and it was the older friars who said, I'd really like a bathroom closer than where it is. And it forced us to rethink how we build property, but it allowed us to plan then in terms of when we don't need it anymore, it's already configured in a way, at least by those standards. Sometimes you still have to do things 30 years later to change it, but it's configured in a way that it can be converted easier. So we are kind of forced into those kind of decisions. Maybe one last property story. It kind of tells you why I am here. Have you been at the Hotel Il Cantico? Some of you may have been there or planning to go there or something. It fell through. Okay. So the Hotel Il Cantico is on the property of the General Curia. The building where I live is the General Curia, the OFMs. We're just outside the Vatican Wall. It was property given to us sold to us by the government for a cheap price after the Second World War. So our friary there was built in the 50s. Quite a bit of piece of property. We had an orphanage at the bottom of the hill. If you come on our property, we actually have a garden, a huge garden in the middle of Rome. You can't believe it. It's like this is in the middle of Rome. At the bottom of the hill was an orphanage. Sisters used to staff the orphanage. When the orphanage systems broke down in Italy and the sisters got too old, the orphanage closed, the building was vacant. So about 12, 13, 14 years ago, the friars decided we need to do something with the property. We were faced with an issue of needing alternative sources of revenue. A little history. Most of the missions of the Franciscan order, because provinces are independent of the General Curia. People think I'm the General Economo, that I have something on the whole order. There's no authority there. We are very independent. Every province is a separate legal and canonical entity almost. We're just part of the same order. So missions were always started by provinces. And we sent two resources, personnel, and we sent financial resources. For example, my province started the Philippine missions. We went there. We built a university eventually. We had a parish. We had schools. And we attracted local vocations, and they became a province. Now there's a province and a custody. We went home. But we went there with friars. The first 4 friars, 3 of them were classmates. So they were a fraternity already. Out of that fraternity, the mission grew. And we had money. We sent money. As the first world religious life is changing, the friars are aging. The resources are being used to care for the elder friars. We don't have the revenue sources. So we don't have human nor financial resources to start new missions. So many of the newer missions are being started by the General Curia, by Rome, which creates problems fraternally because we gather a guy from Croatia, a guy from the United States, a guy from South America, and we say, okay, go to Thailand and be a mission. They don't even know each other. They don't speak the same language. They don't pray the same way, but they're going to go in. So we're struggling through that. That's our struggle right now. But what happened is now the General Curia needs to come up with funds that we don't have to support these missions. The money is in the provinces, not the General Curia. So this idea of an alternative source of revenue in Rome, let's turn the orphanage into a hotel. We're a 15-minute walk from the Vatican. Not a bad idea. We added on. The problem was friars wrote the business plan. So the friars responsible came and gave to the General Curia administration, this is our plan. And they said, great idea. How much money you need? Well, we need X number of million. Okay, we'll get a line of credit from the bank and give you the money. Bad idea. And I told them afterwards, because what happened was what they asked for first wasn't enough. They asked for more. Then they got the idea to invest our endowment so that we could get the money to pay for the hotel. The endowment got lost. We're stuck with the line of credit. Let's call John from the United States to come and straighten this thing out. There's no money in the bank. We have a hotel now that's losing money because the business plan was wrong. We're 71 rooms. As soon as I read the business plan, I was like, there's no way you're going to have this revenue with 71 rooms. There's just no way. I mean, what are you selling here? It's a 3-star hotel. We don't even have a swimming pool or a sauna for that matter. So the business plan was bad. What the order should have done was, Father, great plan. Go to the bank and see if they'll lend you the money. Because the bank will give you a free review of your business plan. They don't charge you for that to tell you we're not going to give you any money. But we thought we could do it ourselves. We thought we have this and we'll handle it. Well, we didn't. So we had to change the way we operate the hotel. The hotel's doing fine. We even survived COVID. We kept all of our employees whole. And the property is an asset that is producing the last 2 years very little, but before COVID, actually a nice sum for our mission projects. So the purpose of the hotel is to support the missions of the order. And so to give you enough time to ask further questions, I'll give you my 2 lessons learned from my experience of working with property. We also have property in Grottaferrata. We have property in Santa Fiora. They all have a story. Both of these properties are vacant. We're trying to figure out what to do with them. The problem that we have if you work in Italy is you go to sell a piece of property and you realize that the friars were very clever in making changes to the property, but never registering those changes, never telling anybody about those changes. So nothing is to what we would call code or legal. So it takes you 10 years to figure all that out and straighten it out. So that's what we're involved in. And my brother thinks I have nothing to do. I don't understand. So 2 lessons learned. 1, Francis was right. The friars should not handle money. We should have experts who handle things of economic value for us. That's where many of you come in, not only for the friars, but for the church. I live in a world of philosophers and theologians, very, very, very good men, holy men, most of them, dedicated. But very few have any experience in working with matters of property, assets, legal matters. And I laugh, when you're ordained, that bishop puts his hands on your head and then puts oil in your hands. It's like, now you know everything and now you can do everything. And that is so wrong. Because this is where we need lay people. Little by little, and I'll be honest with you, in the United States, the women's communities are 10 years ahead of the men's communities on this. To open up our doors to invite experts who have made a career out of doing this kind of work and bring them in a very transparent, open way to help us negotiate these matters. Francis told us this 800 years ago. And we've bought into the whole poverty thing somewhat. But his sense of poverty was not that we have nothing. Francis's sense of poverty is very much what Pope Francis talks about, is that we allow the poor to step into our lives and we step into the lives of the poor. It's not just about writing a check. It's about stepping into the lives of the other. That's what the poverty of Francis is. And we're doing that fairly well in most parts of the world. What we don't do well is managing the temporal assets. We have very few people, very few friars with that skill set in a very complicated world today. When I became the treasurer of my province in the United States in 1990, I replaced a man, Father Francis, who was treasurer for 42 years. 42 years. So I went in there and He stayed on for 2 more years to help me transition and to figure out where everything is hidden. I believe he was burying money back on the 100 acres that we have. We still haven't found it, but I know it's out. That's why we haven't sold that 100 acres, because we know there's a treasure there. But he said to me when he was leaving, he says, John, he says, I'm glad you're here, because this whole thing has become so much more complicated since I began. I said, Father, you began at the end of the Second World War. Things have changed a little bit. And it's true. It used to be that the church could say, we're the church. We're religious. So we moved this door over there. We're the church. It doesn't happen that way anymore. We need lay people. We need experts. We need people with the knowledge and the skills to enter into our world and to become one with us in our mission. This is the second learning that I have from dealing with property in the order and dealing with other assets in the order. We built up our assets and built properties based on our need for mission. Mission shaped where we are and what we have where we are. We built the buildings that we have based on mission. Now, these properties are, in a way, shaping our mission, and that's wrong. The property should not control our mission. We need to free ourselves so that we could focus on mission and repurpose, dispose of, sell, give away that which we do not need. There's a lot of opportunities for repurposing, and we have to open ourselves up to that so that we could live our mission and not spend all of our assets making a liability of property, because we have to now figure out, what do I do with this building that I don't want to get rid of? So it isn't always an asset story. It becomes a liability story if we're not careful. That's where you help us. My 2 lessons learned. Final story. John the 23rd, early 60s. He's the Pope. They're doing remodeling over at St. Peter's. I don't know what building, but somewhere they're doing remodeling. And there's a cardinal and a couple bishops and a couple younger priests involved. And of course, there's an architect and an engineer and whoever else is involved. And they're laying out all the plans and everything. And Pope John the 23rd walks through. And they're excited. He's reviewing their plans. And he looks at the plans. He goes through the plans. Doesn't say anything. And simply bends over and writes a note at the bottom of the plans. And yet we are not angels. And leaves. And yet we are not angels. So the engineers are looking and asking the cardinal and the bishops and the priests, what does he mean? I don't know. What does he mean by this? So eventually they get brave enough to go ask. Back in the 60s, you didn't challenge the Pope like you do today. Today you could challenge the Pope on what he says. But in the 60s, you didn't do this. So they elect the youngest priest there, and they say, you go. The one who has the most to lose. I wonder whatever happened to him. So he goes and he asks the Holy Father. He says, no, you looked at our plans, and what did you mean by this? And yet we are not angels. He said, look at your plans. Where are the toilets? All this work, all this time, and you didn't put in the practical thing of toilets. Buildings are practical things. We have to look at them in a practical way. Sometimes in our vision and mission, we fail to see that practical. That's when the asset becomes a liability. Thank you for listening to me, and thank you for helping the church in your ways.
Any questions for Father John?
Questions or comments, stories?
Thank you very much, Reverend Father. I'm Reverend Father Andreasan Kamara from Sierra Leone. And I think the last point of your presentation resonate well with the first reading of today, the first council of the church, wherein there was this confusion of the widows, some being neglected. And the apostle said, we have to devote ourselves into our mission, the sacraments, and look for other people to go and do the social part of our mission. That is collaboration, teamwork. I think it will help us to preserve the church real estate. My question, Father, you have explained well, but I just want to know if you can help us with some of the administrative procedures in the sale of your property. How is the procedure going when you want to sell your property?
A lot of the procedures are determined by where you are selling the property. My experience has mostly been in the United States. And there we go through a process of, first of all, the province makes a decision that they're going to sell. And even that is complicated because in certain provinces, that decision requires more friars to agree to it. So we start there. Then when the decision is made to sell, we usually go through an appraisal process. And from the appraisal process, we usually bring in an expert marketer, unless we already have someone in mind. The problem is a lot of older church property is very difficult to sell because most people want to knock it down and build something else on the land. So the appraisal is important, but you can't always use that as your selling price. And so working with marketing people specific to the type of property you have. Some of the properties we have are schools, some are huge monasteries, others are like houses. So it's a lot easier to sell those. And then we just go through the process and sell it that way. Here in Italy, it's I'm finding out it's much more difficult. What you end up with is looking at your property and going to the local, here the municipality of Rome, and looking at what they have on register as your building and your property, because it may be very different what you have. And that takes a long time for people to sort through and say, okay, this is what we have. Now, for example, our property in Grottaferrata, huge old monastery, vacated 25 years ago, still has a storage of a lot of books that we're trying to get rid of from an organization that was called Collegio San Bonaventura Coracchi, a research group that still exists. But they entered into a lease agreement with somebody local who was going to turn it into some kind of a medical institute, who began then knocking out walls and changing things without the proper permissions and registration. Then the president of that organization was killed in a car accident. So everything fell apart. Then there weren't documents. By the time I came here, we're trying to find documents. There aren't documents. So we've had some buyers interested in that property to turn it into senior housing. But our problem is running into the municipality there, of trying to sort out what is legal, what is not legal, what changes do we have to make. And it's not only on big properties. I had a small apartment here, not far away from here on Milano. We just sold, but it took us more than 2 years. We began selling it in the beginning of COVID, and then everything shut down because we found out the previous renter of the apartment put in a loft and never approved it anywhere. So to get that loft taken down and getting all the documentation lined up just took time. On a small piece of property like that, we basically went by our own market instincts of that area, what the apartment is worth, and got that very easily, actually a little bit more than we were expecting. On a larger piece of property, we always do an appraisal. I'm also involved now in Thailand, where we're consolidating some of our mission. I was just there. And there, it's understanding, we have a situation there where the diocese sold one of these properties to the friars years ago for a very good deal. At least that's what the cardinal keeps telling me. Father, we gave you a very good deal. I said, but we've improved the property a lot since then. And because he's thinking of buying it back, and I think he wants a very good deal. That's why he keeps saying that. He doesn't realize he's dealing with a capitalist from the United States. So every place is different. And I would say the first thing you have to understand is understand what you're selling. That may mean an appraisal, it may mean marketing research, may be looking at what is the physical condition of the building, what has happened that shouldn't have happened. And the perfect example for the friars on this is in the chapter of 2015 in Assisi. I was a provincial gathered for the chapter when they were revealing all the problems of the 2014 crisis. And the person was giving a report, it was a friar, giving the financial report of the hotel. And I raised my hand and I said, these numbers aren't right. The balance sheet doesn't connect with the income statement. There's no way these numbers are. Oh, and he's convincing me they're right. I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, fine. Then we're sitting there and the friar, the provincials from all over the world, sell the hotel. That's the problem. That's the sin that we created. Sell the hotel. Let's vote. Let's vote. Everyone vote. Sell the hotel. Mandate that we. And I raised my hand. I said, does anybody know how many rooms are in the hotel? Nobody knew how many rooms they were. I said, does anybody know how much we spent to build the hotel? Nobody has that number. So what are you going to sell? Know what you're going to sell. Key. And then understand the world in which you're trying to sell in it and what has to happen to the property. And there's experts to help you do that.
Thank you, Father John, for your inspiring words. Jeff Brownhorst with the Catholic Energies Program in the U.S. At the end of your talk, you called one of your lessons learned is that you shouldn't be dealing with money. Do you mind talking a little bit more about your journey to getting laity more involved? What's gone well? What have been some of your challenges?
Oh, very good. One of the challenge. Well, the first is convincing the people who make decisions of hiring that it's time to bring in lay people. The example I use is in the United States, where my province, I became treasurer in 1990. I hired a controller in 1991. And it was very easily accepted because in many of our parishes, we already had lay people working. In many of our schools, we are collaborating already with other skilled people, not just friars. Yeah, so we're more used to it. I think it was comfortable. When I came here to Rome, I came not knowing the language, not knowing the business culture, and with a big hole to figure out what's going on, like what caused the hole. So I presented a plan to bring in an expert, a local expert, basically a controller. I wanted somebody in the office that knows where we're working. Took me over 9 months to get the position approved. It was just because our council is made up of friars from around the world, 12 guys from around the world, and different experiences. South America is very different than Asia, than Africa. And oh my God, you could bring in a lay person to do this. Okay, finally they approved it. Took me even longer to get approved an adequate salary. I get 250 euro a month for my allowance. They wanted to pay the person 300. No, that's a little exaggeration. But we don't have always the concept of what it takes to bring an expert at this level. And so that was another challenge of education. Another thing my brother keeps telling me, he says, you always wanted to be an educator. Look what you're doing. All along the way, you're educating the order about something. And maybe there's a truth in that. So then we presented it. I went through the interview process. We had some very good candidates. I had my candidate. I brought it to the table for final approval of, again, the definitory. And they said, you're going to hire a woman? I was like, what world am I living in? Because this was a question I did not expect in 2018, whatever year it was. And eventually I had to educate them that it's not about a woman. If we had a friar that could do this in Italy, I'd have no problem bringing a friar in, but I think there's continuity and stuff. So there's those steps. Once we brought the person in, God has blessed. I have a lay staff of five people directly in my office. And the others were all clerical positions, and that was no problem. But this is a management position, and that was the question that they had, because now we have to reveal a lot of things. Well, I said the clerical people know how much money we have in the bank already because they deal with it every day, but that's not the mentality that we have. So it's this education and bringing people to understanding. God has blessed us in that every person that we've brought in has turned out to be a very faithful person, committed to the mission of the friars. And once the friars realized that, everything was accepted. But they were skeptical. So there's some of the things that you have to, a lot of it is working with the skepticism because of the discomfort. We haven't done it this way before. And this whole thing of transparency. We publish an annual. We've done it for, I don't know how many, probably since the 1800s. None of our annuals have a financial report in it. To this day, I still struggle to publish a simple balance sheet, income statement. And if you go to a meeting, we pass it out, numbered sheets, and they collect it. Because it's this fear of, if people only knew, I wish people knew how poor we were. I said, that may help us. So again, it's a cultural thing that we have to work through. And when you bring in lay people, especially experts, it takes the friars a little bit of time to catch on that this is good for us and it's good for our mission, not just for us as friars, but for what we want to accomplish in mission. In the general Curia, because the mission is the friars, it's a little harder. In the missions and schools and hospitals, and it happens faster. I hope I answered your question.
So I just wanted to add a comment as a lay woman working in the church. I think it's really important to do the due diligence on hiring, because so often I see in the church, father or sister, they hire some friendly person that they know and who may be incompetent, maybe a shark, whatever. And so it's really important to do the due diligence. And even in the States, I continue to see this and I don't understand it. There's no excuse for not properly vetting your people. I mean, I just saw a situation today that was brought to my attention, and like it's 2022, and in the United States, we're still not doing background checks consistently. I mean, and the whole trial that's going on in the Vatican right now is a case of, I know a guy on steroids. So it's just, I just can't help but underscore, you got to vet people. And like Carlos said the other day, you have to get, if you're selling something, get 3 offers, not 1. Yeah. If you're hiring, do a public search, and yeah, not just because you know someone or there's a comfort zone. Not professionals.
That is actually a very good point to make, because we like to hire family, people we know. And I always say, even if you end up hiring the person that you know, if that person is the end result of a public search, then you've done your due diligence. But I think if you open it up, you realize what's out there, and the skills that are out there that could help you are phenomenal. Plus, there's a chance. I'm an actuary. Nothing is for sure. All you want to do is reduce the risk of hiring the wrong person. There's no guarantee. Everything I present as a solution to the problem that I found in our Curia, the definitory says, if we do this, does this mean this will not happen again? I said, I'm an actuary. There's no certainty. What I tell you is it reduces the risk of it happening again. And that's what the due diligence is important. Letters of recommendation, a phone call, and realizing that people will say only certain things in a letter of recommendation. You have to be able to read between the lines. And conversations are good to have with people. Being connected with associations. We have an association of treasurers, of English and French speaking treasurers here in Rome. That's a good place where we talk about things. Did you hear about this? What about this? So what are you looking for here? So those networks become very important to understand how to approach it, not necessarily to find the person, to understand how to approach it and cast the net. Jesus casts the net wide. I think that's what we have to do. Thank you.
Good morning, Father John. My name is Charles King, and I'm from Washington, D.C. I've been thinking about all the things that have been said here over the last 3 days in this conference, and some of the things you said have struck me. And one of the things I keep thinking about the Catholic Church, but also other churches, is that the property seems to be shaping the mission. And I totally agree with you. And what I don't think people truly understand is when you make improvements on land, it's for a certain purpose, but that purpose is immediate, and that purpose will change over time. And people like companies, properties are breathing, living things. and they go through this cycle where they're important and they're germane, but that mission, that purpose will change. Now, if it's, let's say it's a housing complex or it's an orphanage, the kids grow up or the people get older and that property does the same thing. And I think you're right. I think the problem is strategically, and I went to a place, I was educated at Harvard Business School, where they said, what is the point? What is the beginning? What is the end game? And what are you going to do? And I think too many religious institutions don't think about the end game, and they collect these properties, but they don't strategically think in 50, 100 years, this mission will no longer be relevant. Demographics change. And so if you start at the beginning thinking strategically, why am I doing this? And what will be the end game? I think you're absolutely right. The property then doesn't become a burden because you thought it through and you're now thinking, okay, at 100 years, it may change. So let's at least put in some thinking of how we're going to shape that. Do you think that might be relevant? Because I'm thinking that might be the way to think about it, is you have to start initially thinking, what is this for? And how am I going to go with it as it matures? I don't know, maybe.
I think it's your own point there. We have historically built for mission. My fear is today we mission to keep what we have. And that's a mistake.
Inertia's right.
We have to constantly reevaluate the mission. And it doesn't always mean we get rid of everything. A lot of it is about repurposing, finding and bringing other people to do things on the property if we want to. It's like back in the 70s when we brought in the farmer to farm our land because we weren't going to do it anymore. That was, when I think about it, that was a real risk for the friars to do that. And that first friar did it for almost 40 years. Then his son was even a little more creative with the marijuana, what the heck, So we have to open up to that. And I don't think it's just religious. I mean, I know a lot of friends of my mother's 84. I know a lot of friends of my mother who are hanging on to their house. It's way too big. My father died 12 years ago, 5 years after my father died. My mother sat the family down at Christmas. I have 2 brothers and a sister, the 4 of us. The sister-in-laws tried to be involved. My mother dismissed them. And she said, this is a family discussion, immediate family, she said. And she said, it was Christmas. She said, I've come to a decision. I'm going to sell the house. And my youngest brother, who was born in that house, said, well, don't you think we should talk about this? And she said, gee, you weren't here when I needed to talk about the new windows or the roof or cutting the grass or shoveling the snow in the winter. No, I've made the decision. She's a prophet. She's courageous. She said, the house is just too big. I don't need this. Her mission changed. And she didn't move to senior housing. She didn't want to live with old people. So she lives in a regular apartment and very happily. But that takes courage. And that's a person. Religious communities, it's harder for us to be that courageous at times, but we need to just keep asking, keep bringing back those questions. But you're right. We need to understand the mission, and the property is temporal. This is something we use for the mission, not to shape our mission.
Thank you, Father Emil, PCM student. I'm attracted with what you said because it's a reality of the congregation, the international congregations, between the general curia, the provinces, and the missions outside the big provinces. As you spoke on the area of the USA and the First World War, I'm speaking on the X world. I don't know what number you are giving us now, but then that world where the mission is created from a province, and then the main province feels there are no more local vocation, and they are to sell properties for starting some missions. And it may be 6 persons who decide of what to sell, how to sell, and then they sell what the congregation may have got since the beginning of 1800, and sell a property that could be an asset for the whole congregation, has become an asset of a province, and it's being sold to start missions away. And then in the mission that is being started, they say we had to have local vocation, as they say. And having local vocation means we have to go back because local have to continue. And once the non-local are there, they have friends, benefactors, their families, and some cash flow is coming for the livelihood. And then slowly start to going and not implanting really something that can make others to survive. Then the mission changes. The mission changes, but in practical, you are there and you have to start your own. You have to establish to live. You have to work. So many good philosophies start to come out so that you know you are from local and you have to make a province. You can no more depend on others because there is no so. You cannot depend on your family and friends because they cannot bring in much. And then that is the problem in congregations. You have lost what was property of congregation, and you have to start something from nowhere. How to solve this? If you have heard some cries of the ex world countries of your congregation.
We have many. We have 12,000 friars throughout the world, 102 entities. So these kind of situations have come up a number of times with provinces that began missions, and then the friars left and handed it over locally, and then who owns that mission? And sometimes the bishop moves in and takes control of the mission land, the property. Then the mission closes and we're trying to start something new, and we can't get the assets over there to start that. All of this, for me, one of the things that I see we have not done well is to document what's happening with the property. And not only documenting who buys the property, but when you get the property originally and the arrangement is made for the mission to begin, to really document what's going to happen when you're not going to use the property like this anymore. Who's going to take control of it? And how, for example, in Thailand, I'm in Thailand, we're in the Bangkok area, and we're Bangkok diocese, and the mission has been struggling there. So we decided to shut down that mission and consolidate that mission and open up a new mission up north. So I went there to meet with the cardinal and then to meet with the bishop and say, here's what we're doing. We're selling the property that we have, and we'll work out a deal with the diocese for the piece that they sold us. I said, but the money is going to stay here. And we drew up a document. The money is going to stay in Thailand. We're working with the Capuchins to help hold the money for us until the new fraternity is formed. And we're forming that out of a custody, not from the generalate, because that hasn't worked for us. We need to have a fraternity to come already to start a new mission. And we will transfer the Curia, will then transfer those assets that we're leaving in Thailand to that new mission to give it. But all of that is documented, written out. When this mission fails, if this mission changes, this is what's going to happen to the assets. This is where the property belongs. And at least that gives you a start to handle controversy, because it's like St. Bonaventure said, the more property you have, the more weapons you need to protect it. And the one weapon is a document, and try to have some documentation to sit there and say, what's going to really happen with this project? That to me is probably the simplest and most direct way to manage property, especially in changing environments. The understanding of my province, we went to the Philippines, is what we build in the Philippines is staying in the Philippines. And when first it was a custody, then it became a province. When they were formed, we transferred everything. But that was because that was the arrangement the administration made in the 50s. And we just followed through with that. So again, it was documented, it was decided. When it happened the way it was supposed to. I'll speak for the friars. I can't speak for other religious communities, though I was trained by the Jesuits, so maybe I can speak for the Jesuits in a different way. But the friars are not good. They're good at backroom dealing and handshakes and a slap on the back, and over a nice bowl of pasta you make big decisions, and a nice glass of wine, of course, if you're in Rome. But we need to learn to be more diligent in documenting our will, our desire, so that 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line, 20, we don't run into these kind of problems. But they happen everywhere. In the past, with the first world missions, there were enough financial resources to cover problems. Today, those resources aren't there. And so the problems are real problems. And so we have to just be careful documenting what we're doing.
Any other questions?
Oh, there's one in the back.
Thank you very much. Although I came late in presence, but I have been with you since 9 a.m. on Zoom. And I so much appreciate this because we have read from the Benedictine, and now we are reading from the Franciscan. So I appreciate it. Mine is a personal question based on my life as a priest, because there is this tendency already growing of almost for some time right now that I really want to manage what I have, and I get into a situation of being miserly at times, or being a little bit of strict in giving out or in being charitable with the little I have, because I do not have much. And I wish to ask, in a practical manner, you that may have lived, or that certainly have lived your priestly life, managing things, was it at a point a distraction to you in your priestly life? And when it was, how were you able to tackle, or how are you going really about it to not be too materialistic, since you take charge of the temporal goods, and then to not be also too liberalistic or too conservative or too spiritual? Because I like the last arguments. In my place, we experienced a whole lot of people who, when we leave them to do things and go to pray, they do whatever they want, especially the lay people. And some priests, because they have experienced 1, 2, 3, 4 betrayals, in quotes, by the lay people, they just want to do it themselves till they are fortunate enough to get people. But this distracts the ministry. As he rightly said, Father, I don't know his name, I've forgotten his name. He said that today, this morning in the reading, most of these things distract us. So how were you able to please walk through your priestly life, or how are you doing it to walk through your priestly life and still discharge these duties without losing both ends in any way?
That's an excellent question, and maybe I should bring my spiritual director to answer part of that question. I struggle with the fact that my skill set has pegged me into administrative duties. All I want to do is teach high school students. That's all I want. I spent Easter week with 42 high school boys from California on pilgrimage in Assisi. It was heaven on earth. Administration is at times a distraction to ministry. Couple of ways that I try to fight that. Number one is keep my hand in something that is more pastoral always. When I was provincial minister, when I was vicar provincial, when I was treasurer of the province, I always had a pastoral ministry. As provincial, every Thursday I went to a high school as chaplain, no matter what. Every weekend I went to so to stay in touch with the pastoral side of being a priest, because it's easy to get trapped. The other thing is on my own schedule in the house to make sure that I don't make the office more important than the fraternity. So for meals, for prayer, for recreation. I also have a point where I don't discuss business unless it's an emergency, and for friars, everything is an emergency sometimes. At the dinner table, in the dining room. I'm in the office, when I'm in the office, please, unless it's an emergency. So you have to try and separate that. Other ways is to not make it your own. The greatest sin against poverty in my eyes is hoarding. And we hoard money. We have provinces throughout the world that are very wealthy, and we have provinces that are in great need. I challenge the wealthy provinces. I say, you're hoarding. What do you need all of this for? You need to share that. We do it with property. If we have empty buildings and properties that we're not using and we're only paying taxes on them, it's a liability. We're hoarding. But it's this thing of possession that what I take care of is not my own. I try to and I tell people this. They say, you make the decision. I say, no, I carry out decisions made by others. I'm the manager. I'm not the decision maker. Everything gets passed down through the channels so that it's not my own. I'm not going to hoard it. I'm not going to possess it. That's why transparency is important. That's why I keep fighting to publish financial information, because that's the way you become transparent, and it becomes all of our information. It becomes all of our issue. And then it doesn't become just a distraction to John, who's the Economo. That's his job. No, it's not my job. It's a part of our life. Economics is a part of our life. And so I have to keep that mindset that I'm not coming to the office to do a job. This is a mission. And I still struggle with this, but the other treasurers tell me, John, your job as Economo is not a job. It is your ministry to the order. I'm not real good at capturing that. So I try these other ways of how I do the work to help me understand that this isn't me. It isn't about my business. And you need people to challenge you and say, you need to get out of the office. You need to think broader than this. The more you could get people involved with your work, so it's not your own, working with staff, collaborating with others, all of this points away so that I don't end up in the office as Father Francis did 42 years by himself in the office. He was a good man and managed it well, but he was 42 years by himself in the office. That isn't spiritually healthy. I don't think so. So thank you for that. That's a very important question.
Please join me in thanking Father John. Thank you.